Guys, can you hear me?
Yes, doctor, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, any question, any queries before we start? Okay, so I'll talk about our presentations next week and the lectures of the next week toward the end of this lecture. Okay. So let me finish, this wrap up session first, and then we can talk about, these organizational points. Okay. So in this session, we'll try to summarize what we have been talking about throughout the semester and what kind of research traditions and research theories we have been talking about, and what kind of explanations comparativists would offer to the real world puzzles. So actually this course is divided into two parts. So the first part, we tackle mainly the ideal type research or theoretical schools or traditions in the field, rational choice, culturalism, structuralism, and then neo-institutionalism as as like hybrid traditions of all of them. Structuralism, culturalism, and rational choice. And in the second part, we try to unravel or to show this kind of interplay between theory and empirical cases, and how. So let me see this message. Guys, can you hear me?
Yes, doctor, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay. So Mayar, perhaps you have like a connection issue. So here, so we try to highlight, this interplay between like theory and empirical cases, and how some theoretical discussions and debates resonate in some empirical cases. And we also show how these kind of thematic and substantive research issues or topics triggered the same kind of theoretical debates, most especially, or for example, when we talked about political economy. So we have talked about we talked about different research traditions or different theoretical traditions, and how they would like answer some questions related to political economy, the role of ideas and the ideational forces of economic policies formulation, or like structural analysis with an like huge emphasis on the role of the state and the patterns of interventions. With contentious politics, I'm going to talk in some detail about this. In contentious politics, for example, we talked about this structural explanation, and and also like cultural framing that actually emanating from these cultural traditions, and how like you can, in these kind of thematic topics or issues, these kind of you can tackle the topic from different theoretical perspectives, and you have to be aware of the methodological caveats or lacunae that these kind of gaps exist in these theoretical explanations, in order to make up your mind and to make these kind of trade-offs between different theoretical schools. And the central point here between like connecting theory and like thematic topics and some empirical questions or empirical puzzles is to show how this kind of interconnection between theory and research design, that they are not separable. You cannot separate theory from real world puzzles or social and political problems or questions you need to solve. So the you can start out with these big questions, like the theory would help out, with formulating these big questions and giving you some abstract ideas and notions in order to unravel, the mechanisms by which people would put claims on the national government, as we talked about Sandinistas, for example, or students in Tiananmen Square in China. So how theory would offer you some big questions and would offer you some mechanisms that would help you unravel and discover these mechanisms, and cases would offer or would show the plausibility of this causality or causal mechanisms in some real world cases or some realistic puzzles. So the two parts of the course are pretty much related, and there's a rationale behind dividing the course into these two parts. The first part that actually highlighted the main theoretical debates between different schools in the field, and the second part that focused on the empirical cases or the empirical or realistic puzzles, and how these realistic puzzles actually the same theoretical debates manifested themselves in these empirical and thematic topics. So let's start with the first part of the course, and we have talked mainly about this theoretical divide, and this is your midterm question, this kind of divide between rationalist and culturalist. Can anyone elaborate on this? Based on what criteria how can we base this theoretical divide between rational choice and cultural school? This is your midterm question, and I already posted comments on this. Where does this division emanate from? What's the logic behind this divide, theoretical divide? Anyone? So as comparativist, some issues like comparison, quantitative, qualitative tools, this kind of causality, generalization, explanation, interpretation, it's all these ideas actually floating around your head as a comparativist, and you have some questions or research problems you need to bear on, or you need to resolve, or to offer plausible to address and to offer plausible answer. This kind of division between culturalist and rationalist, it's actually rooted into this division between nomothetic and idiographic divide, this kind of division, whether or not this regularities exist and we can reach generalization or law-like regularities exist in the real world, or it's kind of a narrow focus and specific focus, and we have only interpret or offer some degree of understanding of social and political phenomena. So these kind of division between explanation, interpretation, or understanding, like general law or specific case studies, actually animated this theoretical debates between rationalist and culturalist. And there is another debate, amongst, comparativists, whether we can focus only on abstract and theoretical debates, like how can we improve on game theoretic models, or how can we how can we actually offer some advance or innovation in neo-institutionalism? How can we offer independent account of institutions, as theoretically speaking, or we actually do care more about some real-world puzzles and cases? So we are motivated mainly by questions and problems, mainly, or your outcome variable, your dependent variable. So I don't care about these kind of don't care much about these theoretical debates, but pragmatically speaking, I do care about empirical cases and some puzzles in the real world, so I need to resolve, and whatever it takes. So I can like borrow different theoretical tools from different schools or different theoretical traditions in order to offer plausible answer, or to offer like to generalizable outcomes in order regarding this social and political phenomena. So there is kind of different debates in the field that actually rooted into whether or not we can reach this law like regularities, or whether or not these regularities and recurring patterns actually do exist in the first place, or we need just to focus narrowly on some cases in order to improve, to deepen our understanding about these social and political phenomena. And this actually triggered some sort of debate about methodologically and theoretically oriented field, or problem oriented or problem motivated comparativist or field. So whatever it is, if you are motivated by questions and problems or outcome variables, some puzzling issues or puzzling phenomena in the real world, or you are motivated mainly by methodological and theoretical debates, either way, you comparativists, they do care about they do care about theory, because they need to reach or to formulate some sort of causal generalization that is not only limited to the case the study, but actually these generalizations and these law would hold across different, would travel across different cases. So what you study from this particular cases can tell something about other cases as well. So this kind of theoretical or methodological oriented research design, or case oriented research design, it's kind of never ending discussion, but in all cases you do care about these kind of causal mechanisms and causal dynamics, and as a comparativist you do care about theory in order to reach these kind of generalization about social and political phenomena. And we actually we had like many applications or many examples of these competing theoretical schools or theoretical traditions with different variants. For rational choice, for example, last week we studied Robert Bates about this political economic dialectic, and how economic interest would shape policy preferences or would shape political institutions, and then how political institutions would limit the expression of some economic interest that eventually would lead to the perpetuation or the continuity of some inefficient economic institutions, and eventually it led to the tragedy of famine in Kenya. So what he actually did, he focused on how like social choices, collective choices, would account for irrationality in Kenya's political economy. So he started out with this agrarian economic structure and resettlement programs in the post-colonial state that shaped the political institutions in Kenya. And these political institutions, given this historical and institutional setting, led to like some entrenched vested interest amongst politicians that they sought mainly vote maximization at the expense of economic efficiency, and eventually led to some dramatic outcomes in Kenya. And they didn't actually offer any incentives to restructure the market or the inefficient economic institutions in capital market and economies economies of scale. So what actually Robert Bates did here, he actually offered, he responded to some criticism offered by critics of rational choice, that they actually don't offer like the accusation of this parsimonious account, that actually they didn't care more about this historical context and constraints in order to identify players and these choices. So what he offered here, he brought the history and institutions back into the analysis by offering this analytic narrative. It's still like emanated from rational choice traditions, but he actually responded and took seriously some of the criticism by offering by actually focusing on historical context and institutions in order to understand the origins of policy preferences. And he actually revisited Alston's account about interest group, that says actually group size, if you have like small group size, this would be much more easier for them to lobby in order to push for some transformation to accumulate their wealth, or to maximize their benefits or utility. So here, like landowners, the given these constraints, the rent extraction and single party system, they were not able to push through radical transformation and to transform market structure, and they actually accumulated losses, and they were not able to push for radical transformation because of this historical context of institutional building that actually delimited these policy preferences and delimited their collective action. With culturalist tradition, we focused on many examples, but we actually offered some detailed account to James Scott notion about resistance. He actually investigated different forms or everyday forms of peasant resistance in Malaysia, in village called Sedaka. So he focused in paddy growing region, and how peasants actually offered different meanings to the social order, that at first glance it would seem that he actually turned like Gramsci's account on its head by offering like these people are not landowners, actually they were not manipulated peasants' minds, and to oblige them to subordinate themselves to the hegemonic position of the landed elites, but actually they developed their resistance tools or different meaning about norms and rules from within the same hegemonic structure. So that there had been some sort of a struggle over meaning and samples. So they didn't actually buy into the story of landed elites or landowners, that they actually helped them by offering them loans and obliging them to obedience or compliance, but actually they dubbed them as greedy, and they needed to protect their own livelihood. So that's why they advanced some modest claims instead of making these kind of revolutionary or anti-capitalist discourse. They didn't assign this kind of meaning to the existing social order, but they advanced some sort of modest claims in order to shield or to protect their livelihood. But it didn't negate the fact that they actually developed their own meaning of resistance by like gossiping or committing some robbery actions. This is the meaning they assigned to these to their social order, and it needed to some sort of ethnographic research in order to dig deeper, or in order to understand how peasants actually constructed meaning or assigned meaning to their social order that actually totally detached from this manipulation and ideological hegemony of landed elites. With a structuralist account, we studied like more, but here like Skocpol account on social revolutions actually was one of the path breaking studies in structuralist account here. So basically, she offered, actually she criticized the Marxist notion about the degree of autonomy, the degree of autonomy of the state, as it's kind of a tool in the hands of capitalist or dominant class in order to accumulate their wealth or to advance their own benefits. She actually rejected this notion and offered independent account and emphasized the autonomy of the state from the dominant and subordinate classes. And she offered this comparative historical analysis in order to compare how the crisis emerged in the agrarian structure in China, Russia, and France that eventually led to social revolutions there. She rejected, any intentionalist notion or agency of people. It was social revolutions emerged or emanated from structural contradictions in these agrarian structures, given this historical context of imperial and expansionist states and the international positions of these states with regard to military capacities and trade relations that made some states much more vulnerable than others to these international pressures. So given, these kind of international positions and world historical circumstances, structural contradictions actually emerged at a specific point, and the revolutionary processes unfolded in these countries that gave way to this interclass and intra-class relations. So still, like she paid attention to class relations and class struggle, but within, the unfolding processes, revolutionary processes that gave way to these struggles and enabled marginal elites to jump onto the bandwagon in order to push for, to dismantle old power structures or old administrative and coercive apparatuses and to reestablish like a new state, meaning, new administrative and coercive apparatuses in these countries. So these kind of theoretical debates, when we talk about like rational choice, culturalism, structuralism, they are not like one coherent whole as well. So there are many variants in these schools. As I mentioned, like Bates, for example, responded to some critics and offered, analytic narrative in order to bring, refuting, this ahistorical and asocial account, and brought, these historical elements and institutional elements into the model of political equilibrium that not necessarily that it hasn't to be rational in a way or another. He explained some sort of collective irrationalities in the agrarian economy in Kenya. So there are like some variants within each school, and they responded in a way or another to some of the criticism offered to the main theoretical pillars or the methodological tools used by hardcore rationalist, hardcore culturalist, or hardcore structuralist that they actually believe in this structural determinism, and they didn't offer any room for agency, as we're going to see. So these kind of theoretical debates, even with the variance within each school, they are actually predicated or actually based on they reshape the research inquiry, but actually they are based on different perception or different notion about ontology and epistemology, the theory of existence and the theory of knowledge, what kind of reality that does exist, and thus we can reach some sort of general law about this objective reality out there, so we can make any causal and generalizable claim about this reality, or there is no kind of objective reality out there, and there is a dichotomy and division between reality and appearance. So that's why we need to develop some this would actually determine what can we know and how can we know about this reality. So these kind of theoretical debates, even with the variance within, they depart from different ontological and epistemological debates, and each school has its own methodological and has its own gap. And as a researcher or comparativist, you have to be fully aware of these theoretical and methodological gaps in order to make like conscious choice about using this school or theoretical tool or theoretical school or the other in order to investigate social and political phenomena. For rational choice, the theory of existence, so they do believe in a world wherein like individuals intentionally can make choice. Rational individual, when the rational individuals actually face different courses of action. So as a rational individual, you make your own calculations, you work things out in order to rank your preferences, and then you will choose, the best over the worst. So you will choose, the alternative, the policy or the choice that would maximize your utility and would satisfy or meet your own interest. And in real world, so they had to respond to this world of incomplete information, and they had to respond to this kind of strategic interactions, like you're not like working on your own, or you have to interact with other actors, so you don't make your own choices or you rank your own preferences separately from what others would choose, or what others would act. So this kind of strategic interactions between different actors or different players in an environment of incomplete information and uncertainty, like pushed rationalists to develop game theoretic models in order to bring this kind of uncertainty and incomplete information into the analysis. But in total, departing from this ontology and the existence of intentionality and the capacity of individuals to calculate or to work out and to rank their preferences in order to make the best choice that would maximize their utility. So they do believe in this, the existence of this recurrent law-like processes, and hence you can adopt this kind of, or reach positivistic explanation and make generalizable outcome about the about social and political, about human, like individual behavior, or actors behavior and actors choices. um, as I mentioned, another variant in rational choice, they actually brought like the constraints actually that exist in the surrounding environment, like cultural and structural constraint, into their equilibrium model, and to this point from which no player or no actor would have an incentive to defect, because no improvement would be possible after reaching this point. So they brought, as Bates did, they brought these kind of context and historical context and institutional constraints. They brought these into the analysis in order to make much more complex and compelling argument without sacrificing the main pillars of rational choice. So they're still generalizable, it's still positivistic in essence, but they made much more compelling and much more complex analysis when it comes to this strategic interaction between different players. With culturalism, so their own world as culturalists, the culturalists, their own worlds actually depicted or portrayed in this culturally embedded individuals. So they focus mainly on this shared knowledge, beliefs, values, and meaning about social order, or this kind of shared worldview in a given in a given society. So people they share some norms and meanings and values regarding their own social orders, and they construct meaning to and assign meaning to this social order. So they actually focus on this intersubjectivity, and actually culturalism, they do care about this collectivity or the mental code that actually shared by a majority of certain groups or a majority of people in a given society. So this kind of intersubjectivity, they focus on two main elements: this cognition and conscience, that they exist in a society. So that's why they focus on a uniqueness of each society. If you do care about this culturally embedded individuals and shared knowledge and common knowledge and goals and beliefs and values, so this kind of it's a society specific properties. So it's not generalizable to other societies. What's applicable to Egyptian society is not applicable to Syrian society or any other societies. So these kind of, so the idea is rooted in this notion is rooted into, or the theoretical assumption actually, these theoretical assumptions are rooted in this idea, idiographic idea about the uniqueness of society. So thereby you cannot reach any general law about meaning construction, about different values and different norms. So what comparativists or culturalists, they actually do, they deepen or they improve understanding about specific cases in order to offer compelling interpretation, not necessarily like discovering, causal mechanisms, how X causes Y, or how independent variable, how cultural norms and values causes, the outcome variable, like um, resistance or social revolutions. But they don't care about, the interpretation, how people, how protesters or claimants actually they develop their own frame of understanding, or they frame their cause in order to amplify their discourse and attract adherents to put claims on the national government. This is with regard to contentious politics, for example. So the thing is, as a comparativist, you understand social order, you understand meaning, the construction of the meaning from the point of view of the participants. So perhaps you as a researcher or a comparativist, you have a different understanding. And when you do like interviews or ethnographic studies, so the participants, they have like totally different understanding. So they construct, their own meanings, and you as a comparativist or a researcher, you understand from through people's understandings. So they construct meaning, or they assign meaning to their social order, from their own understanding. And you as a comparativist, you just report or understand how they understand their social order, and how they construct meaning and assign meaning to their social order. For structuralism, they depart from this holism or entity-based ontology. They don't care about, agency. They don't care about, this atomistic, vision about individuals or individuals' choices, orientations. They don't care about, or events like or choices or orientations or events. We do care about, this entity as a whole, as a coherent whole, and this overall system or overarching system. The system contains, or actually is made up of some elements. As a structuralist, they do care about, linkages and interdependencies between these elements, and they need to understand any dynamic or static relationships between political, economic, and social relationships between the components or the elements of this overall system, whether like institutions, organizations, individuals, groups, whatever. And this ontology, departing from this theory of existence, so they do believe in the existence, again, in these regularities, as similar historical sequences occur in similar structures. So that's why they can reach this causality. They can make, causal claims and reach this law-like regularities or general laws in order to explain this macro transformation. So they don't care about these larger processes, state building, revolutions, capitalist transformation, state-society relations. So they don't care about these macro transformations or the macro level analysis. And like the thin account or the functional account of a structuralism that actually led the groundwork or inspired, other studies in these theoretical in this theoretical tradition, was like Karl Marx or Marxism, with the base or substructure and superstructure, and with this emphasis on class struggle and economic determinism. And then different other studies, departed from the same structuralist as like overall system, with kind of interdependencies and linkages and relations between its own elements, would account for this macro transformations, like state building, as I mentioned, or transformations in the economic system. So despite the variance between that actually exist in each school, and they try in a way or another to respond to or to accommodate some of the criticisms, some of the criticism offered by opponents or critics, they still exist some trade-offs as comparativists. They have to be aware of, and actually they aware of these kind of trade-offs while making or doing your research. So for rational choice, if you focus mainly on if this is the prime focus, the intentional choices and the calculations of individuals, and ranking preferences in order to understand behavior and choices, like voter choices, or and even like a protest or contentious politics. So you need to understand individual behavior. So there is kind of overestimation of the calculative capacity of the individuals. They deal with the individual that actually makes choices, and this is like the focus or the center of the analysis, as kind of these kind of calculations and ranking preferences. It's kind of mechanical behavior in order to maximize utility. So they have to rank preferences in order to select or to choose the best over the worst. In this context, despite, as I mentioned, some rationalists actually responded to this, but in total they miss out on values and context, how social norms and social values and the context actually would restrain and impose constraints on these choices, or on people's behavior. So they are not like totally, in addition to, as I mentioned, these kind of structural and environment constraints, and cognitive and psychological biases as well, that actually undermined or eroded, this rational calculative capacity of the individuals. But anyways, as rationalists, they have to be fully aware, and actually must be willing, to trade off, to make, these trade-offs by focusing on or overestimating, these calculative capacities. So they miss out, or they actually gloss over contextual or environmental constraints. For culturalists, or in order to interpret or to offer, some degree of deepening understanding, so they focus mainly on the power of ideas, the role of norms and values and beliefs and meaning that would account for a specific outcome. So they actually relegate to the material, the material constraints or the material explanations to the margin in order to focus, and they brought this ideational forces or ideal to the forefront. So the problem here with it's okay, to do or to conduct, research by focusing on or seeing through the cultural lens. But there is a problem here that these kind of norms and values are not easily observable. You can only observe these norms and values when they are in decline. I've got a question. I can't remember who actually asked this question, but like some of you tried to apply um, this cultural perspective or cultural theoretical tool in order to understand how people actually took to the streets in January uprisings, the 25th. So actually, what they tried, I think they tried to say something about how people actually broke, these barriers of fear, and by breaking, these as deeply entrenched, values and beliefs amongst Egyptians, and how breaking with these values and norms enabled actors in order to protest and to take to the streets in order to push for or to push through political reforms. I do remember my reply that it's perfectly fine to say this, but the thing is we don't have tools that would tell us, that there is kind of a change before the eruption of the uprisings. we cannot observe this before the outbreak of the uprisings. We only observe this in the process. And there is another problem about testability, how to test, the how can you make sure that these norms and beliefs and values would actually account for this specific outcome, or this outcome is a consequence of change in these, or a shift in these norms and values. So these are, it's perfectly fine to do or to conduct this kind of research that focuses on, or to offer this kind of cultural analysis, but you have to be fully aware of the difficulties or the existing lacuna or gap in this research tradition. Another problem that people that would use survey data in order to understand people's values and beliefs and meaning, this would trigger another problem. When you offer cultural accounts, so you do care about collectivities, the aggregate level of meaning, values, and these kind of norms about social order. So survey data would actually trigger or generate this problem of aggregation, this problem of I-we dichotomy. How do we know that these people actually this kind of aggregate level from individual data or individual based data would offer valid test to people's this collective norms and behavior. So there are methodological caveats, and in addition to these issues about observation and testing, you make another trade-off by overlooking people's choices. So as a culturally embedded individual, so the individual is entirely constrained or a product of these norms and even with the engaging or involving in a process of reconstruction of the meaning or the behavior is still within the parameter or the boundaries constituted by this kind of collective level of shared knowledge or common knowledge and common beliefs. So there, you don't really offer independent account of individual choices or agency choices. For structuralism, so one of the main theoretical issue here or gap here, this kind of a structural determinism, as there is no room for intentional or voluntarism, as Skocpol mentioned. So certainly they gloss over agency choices and agency or orientation. They don't offer this kind of interplay or interaction between agency and structure, because they actually relegate, or they don't care about agency or orientation and choices and the ability, actually the agency of the people to start with. Some other actually variants, they responded to this by offering this kind of dynamics between material constraints and social norms in collective action, as actually we saw with Taro and Telly account on contentious process-based account of contentious behavior. So the thing is, whether you care more about theoretical discussions or motivated by theoretical and methodological debates that actually rooted in this division, ontological and epistemological divisions, or you do care about real world puzzles or real issues, or you adopt this pragmatic approach to comparative politics by focusing mainly on the outcome variable and dependent variable, and you can take whatever you deal with the theories as tools that would help you understand and address your questions and resolve the puzzling issue you have in your mind. So whether or not you need to use theories in order to explain, and in a vast majority or the mainstream studies, just to make generalizable outcomes that's not limited to particular cases, but they actually talk to or they can the outcomes or these theoretical explanations, they can speak to other cases. So we actually offered it's not like a fourth school, but another tradition that actually gained hold in the 80s, new institutionalism that actually it didn't represent as well homogeneous theoretical tradition or theoretical school, because we talked at least about three variants of new institutionalism, departed from the same ontological position of rational choice. So we talked about rational choice in new institutionalism or institutionalism, and from culturalism, normative or sociological. And as I mentioned, there's kind of a thin line or a difference between both of them. And historical institutionalism, that they do care about, structural elements and some ideational forces as well. And new institutionalism, they offered, they actually emerged, in order to offer independent account, to the role of the institutions that would shape people's behavior, instead of like being an outcome variable. It can be, institutions actually can be independent variable that would help you understand different outcomes. And theoretically speaking, they discussed, or they cared more about how institutions actually emerged and how they came about, the continuity and change in particular rules and the rules of the game. For rational choice institutionalism, they departed from the same logic of this logic of calculations or calculus that people actually solve their, in order to resolve their coordinating problem or collective action problem, and to offer some sort of informational device and to minimize the transaction cost. So they agreed on the establishment of particular institutions in order to maximize their utility. Institutions still don't shape people's preferences, but actually the out of this utility maximizing motivation, so people actually would engage in the creation of some institutions. And for sociological, they do care about how institutions would determine this what's appropriate and what's inappropriate to individuals, that they don't actually, these sociological institutions, they don't shape only people's behavior, but they actually shape their identity, how the people would perceive themselves and how they perceive themselves in relation to others. With and it can change by changing in the environment and receiving some signals from the surrounding environment, so people would encode these signals, or shifting in the meaning into their actual behavior. For historical institutionalism, and actually this is what you missed out on your reaction papers, so you have to focus on the key elements, or the key pillars of the theoretical assumptions of the school, that focus on the critical juncture and path dependency, how people at some critical moments, or actors would face branching points, so they have to make choice to make this choice or that choice, which is acquire this qualities of path dependency. It would be very difficult because of the increasing return, so it would be very difficult for them to reverse. For some comparativists, they don't even they focus on this division between culturalism and rational choice, or these are the division between these two schools, and they even put new institutionalism and structuralism. They don't consider these traditions as independent schools, but they place them in this eclectic messy center. So the other one kind of middle ground, or avoiding this kind of never ending lively and intellectual debates about this theoretical division, and whether or not rational choice or culturalism would have the predominant position and would offer a paradigm for a political scientist or a comparativist, uh, in the symposium here, the focus and before, like the great cafeteria of the center, the notion made by Almond. So these people, they focus on what they call this kind of eclectic messy center. So as comparativists, they are mainly motivated by problems, like research problems. Some they endorse this kind of pragmatic approach to theories or the existing theoretical schools. So they don't care about dependent variable, as I mentioned, the outcome variables. So you don't care about certain and really puzzling social and or political phenomenon, and you need to examine and whatever it takes, so you can, in order to resolve or to understand, to explain this outcome. So you need like theories in order to help you to offer you some causal mechanisms and plausible causality that would help you understand and address this question. So whether it's ration choice, structuralism, culturalism, whatever it is, so you do care about the outcome variable, and you borrow some theoretical tools, or you deal with the theories as here as like pragmatically as a tool in order to address these puzzles. um, so the central notion or idea here is like cases are kind of building blocks for general theories, so you can develop like a more complicated or complex theoretical account that focus on cultural that would borrow some cultural tools or institutional tools in order to understand the subject, or in order to make some theoretical claims. So and theories as well. So theories in this sense would offer you a lens, like useful lens, in order to identify what's really interesting and particular about these cases. So again, they are not separable, as in the World Politics Symposium here. I think Peter Evans mentioned something about you can still challenge the theories and cases, and understanding or approaching the focusing on the dependent variable would help you, would trigger more thoughts or trigger more hypotheses that actually need to be tested in future studies. For example, the study about, in order to understand the issue of development in Brazil, literature actually focuses on dependency after the Second World War, and how this dependent structure on international market would account for the development outcome in Brazil. So while understanding this like dependency and development, the literature tried to withdraw the analysis, or to apply this to generalize this outcome to East Asian countries, but they found totally different independent variable that would be interesting. For example, this cross-class alliance, or the relationship between business people and the state. It's much more important than the dependency on the international market that's not applicable to this case. So this kind of, and this would help scholars to go back and revisit some hypotheses or some outcomes made before, by testing more hypotheses and reaching more generalizable or reaching novel theoretical claims. So in realistically, like cases are too complex to vindicate one theory, and in order to make this compelling and theoretical explanations, these theoretical explanations have to be generalizable, or have to speak to other cases. So in all cases, like in order to break with this theoretical and intellectual debates about this culturalism or general law, or interpretation, explanation or interpretation, or case specific. So some people actually approach it this pragmatically, and in all cases, reducing theories as a tool, if you do care about problems, your commitment to making a generalization or reaching general law would bring theory back into the analysis, or place it in the forefront as well. So generally speaking, the whole issue here is you need to make theoretical, generalizable, and theoretical claim in order to unravel or to focus on this discernible pattern in order to understand how X causes Y. The plausibility of the causality has to speak to different cases. And they mentioned like like the vast majority, you know, of studies in comparative politics, you know, lies in this macro inductive scholarship. So they don't actually depart from a priori theorization or this deductive, you know, mode of building arguments, as it's the case with the rational choice. So you don't have like, you know, theory beforehand in order to apply, or this kind of culturalist perspective and meaning construction. So it's not like only narrow focus, and it's not only deductive. So the vast majority actually lies in this macro inductive scholarship in order to understand this macro transformation. This would generate new hypotheses, and would improve even, you know, by generating more hypotheses and testing more hypotheses and showing the applicability and plausibility of the testing, you know, hypotheses in different cases. This by definition would improve the theories, or the state of the theories exist in comparative politics. And they loosely defined, you know, the proponents of this messy center. So they loosely define, you know, the core of comparative politics. It's problem-oriented, you know, comparativist, this kind of orientation towards real-world problems and commitment to make causal generalization. In order to break, you know, with these debates, and in order to show how some thematic topics and some themes would trigger, you know, some big questions, and theories actually would help you answer these questions. So we design, you know, the second part of the course in order to show how in order to understand some puzzles and some topics, you know, some approaches that actually have been long neglected as psychological approaches, for example, and cognitive and heuristic biases. They actually, some scholars actually reformulated or used these approaches in order to understand recent and social and economic, social and political problems. So they offered, you know, some new formulation of old approaches, and in some cases, as it was the case in contentious politics, they offered some sort of synthesis of between different theoretical approaches in order to bear on the subject, or in order to fully understand contentious behavior. So starting out with this mass behavior, so we focus on two types of mass behavior: voting behavior and contentious behavior. And we had like some theoretical question that that actually these questions emerged from real world puzzles of like some clear and obvious trend of de-alignment and realignment, partisan de-alignment and realignment. People broke with old partisan identification and affiliations and realigned their partisan affiliation to new parties. And different trajectories of contentious politics. Why some revolutionary or some protesters managed to bring about some significant political transformations, while others actually didn't, by focusing on Sandinistas and Tiananmen Square in China. So starting with this voting behavior, some explanations, you know, offered, you know, this kind of cognitive mobilization and the role of the political parties in order to offer the functionality of political parties in order to offer information or to function as informational device. And this would offer some sort of attachment, either functional or psychological attachment to the existing parties. Or some structural explanation, as Lepst and Rokan, with the emergence of party system in Europe, and how structural divisions, territorial or religion and class-based divisions, it actually manifested themselves, these divisions in party system, and actually subsequently people's voting behavior depending on these divisions. Or an institutional account would help you understand, you know, the continuity or change in the party system. The institutional account, like electoral system, most especially. And then the possible, synthesis or building blocks, for theoretical perspectives offered, by literature that offer this dual focus on party voter nexus. Because the thing with the psychological or structural or institutional account, they focus on one side rather than the other. The distribution of policy preferences and the role of education in changing, these policy preferences, and technological innovations or advances, and how this actually uh, affected both like the orientation or the people's choices, like voters choices on the one hand, because they had like different sources of information. So the parties now, they are not the only source of getting political information. And technology as well, like this enabled political parties to count more or heavily on these technologies in order to create their policy programs or political platform, rather than basing their ties or bonds to electoral constituencies through mass organizations that actually is spreading across the country as it had been before. And with contentious actions, there are different variants, that would account for why people actually protest or why men rebel. So rational choice variant focus on resource mobilization theory, uh, departing from the same rationalist logic by offering, some leadership and avenues for communication between different people. These people, would have like the organizational basis that would enable them to resolve their collective action problem, and then would make their claims on the national governments. Or a structure, from structural perspective, some other trend or stream, the focuses on the permissible or conducive political opportunity structure as like democratic opening, or elite defection, that or realignment between different components of the ruling elites that enabled social movements to advance and to push for their claims. And from cultural perspective, some scholars and another stream in the literature highlights the role of cultural framing, the meaning people or social, like members of social movements, assigned to the existing structure that would enable them to act and to place or to press their claims and their demands. And then one effort of making synthesis between different accounts made by Telly and Taro and McAdam, they actually offered this process-based account by focusing on elite defection from this permissible political opportunity structure, and how this shifting, elite alignment would offer, permissible political opportunity for protesters and for revolutionary forces to make to push through their demands. And this process of claim making, how the process actually unfolds by shifting the analytical focus to social so aggrieved participants, in order to make sure how they actually articulated their grievances, and how actually they attracted potential adherents to their and amplified the discourse, or to make people to convince people and to make them believe in their cause. And then this kind of decertification or invalidation, regionally or internationally, or from within, or domestically or externally, and how they together would account for different trajectories of contentious politics in like the case of Sandinistas in Nicaragua, and the student movement in China in Tiananmen Square. And then we move to the regime change and democratization issue, and how this theme or like research area triggered some theoretical debates and contestation between different scholars. So we focused on theoretical questions that actually revolved around the existence, or whether or not we can speak of social prerequisites of democracy. So we need to have like some structural prerequisites, social and economic prerequisites, in order to install democratic governance? Is there any systematic relationship between economic crisis or level of development and democracy? Is it like exclusively a structure-based explanation in order to understand how democracy historically was installed? What role can be assigned to liberal and democratic values? These values, or this liberal and democratic culture, is a cause or an outcome or an effect of democratic regime or democratic rule. Starting out with this structural explanations, we investigated, the modernization account and how modernization like triggered, some sort of, in and of itself, actually offered permissible, structural context in order to install or to develop democratic governance by focusing on the level of education and urbanization and the level of industrialization. So this affluent and educated environment enabled or facilitated the establishment of democratic rule. Or with this kind of industrialization and capitalist transformation, this triggered or gave way to meaningful or large-scale social and structural transformation in the class structure. So it's not only like the level of literacy level or urbanization, but it's also it changed the balance of forces between different classes, either like working class, as Ruschemeyer and Huber and Stefan mentioned, how this industrialization changed the balance of power and enabled working class to push for political admission, or more account about the role of the bourgeoisie class, and the account of the bourgeois revolution, and how this would account historically led to the establishment of democratic governance. And then we focused on and we explained in some detail, whether or not there is kind of a systematic explanation regarding the level of development and democracy. And we focus on Gasorowski's piece in APSR. He conducted, this pooled time series cross-section analysis in order to reach, this conclusion that there is no it's time. It depends on the time. He offered like a time variant account that the same variables, work in the same economic variables that led to democratic breakdown historically enabled, transition, especially inflation, and sluggish economic growth actually had no significant effect on the democratic transition after the third wave democratization cascaded, Latin American countries and the fourth wave later. So actually, finishing, with this structural explanations, we focused on institutional account of democratic governance and what would account for how institutions would enable, would stabilize or destabilize the political system. And we focus on polity structure, parliamentary or presidential system, and the presidential system, as Juan Lenz mentioned, would account for more. Would destabilize the regime if we compare this to parliamentary system, and the electoral system as well, that would enable, some ethnic minorities and other marginalized and underrepresented groups to have some sort of representation, and this would account for stability or instability of the political system, continuity, endurance, or change in political regimes. And then we focus on the agency and elite choices. So it's not only structural factors or institutional factors, it's kind of elite choice in this transition moment that would account for the installation historically, that accounted for the installation of democratic governance. And we basically focus on this division between softliners and hardliners and elite, that enabled elite some sort of reconciliation and compromise between the incumbent and opposition leaders, softliners of the old regime and moderate oppositions, from moderates, from social oppositions, and how they get to the negotiation table and they converge on some policy agenda and relegating some inherently insoluble issues, to the margin in order to push for democratic governance. And Michael Macfall focused, it's not only the balance of forces that incumbents and softliners and moderates, actually because of uncertainty about balance of power between them, they know little about each other. So that's why they got to the negotiation table in order to have some sort of pact with coalitional or non-coalitional elements that enabled the installation of democratic governance. It's not only not necessarily the balance of forces, but actually when the political opposition, they had some sort of decisive power advantage, as Michael Macfall mentioned, in the case of the former Soviet states. This actually, the decisive power advantage of the moderates, it enabled them to put an end to the communists and to install democratic governance in East Europe. And then we focus on this debatable issue, the role of the liberal and civic culture and tolerance and acceptance and non-violent, attitude towards outgroups, whether cultural and liberal norms are necessarily essential or precondition, to establish democratic rule, or as as Dancourt also mentioned about, a habituation process, that it actually it came later, it's a product of democratic rule rather than a cause of establishing democratic governance. And then the last two themes, we offered some sort of a structural explanation by focusing on this large-scale transformation, or focusing on this macro structural analysis by focusing on political economy and state and market relations and state-society relations as well. And we were motivated by some theoretical questions as well. So here, the questions we do care about, or we did care about with regard to state-society relations, whether or not we can deal, what state is. Can we deal with the state as a coherent, as an organic entity, as a coherent whole, or it's better, to adopt, this deconstructionist approach in order to understand the patterns of interaction between state and society. And we examined in some detail, and that was purely theoretical debate about, this state in society approach offered by Joel McDowell, and how state actually managed to reproduce its dominant, and citizens offer, their unconditional or some sort of continual acceptance, to this legitimate authority of the state. And we highlighted or pinpointed, the role of the cultural reproduction and this kind of mix between cultural reproduction and institutional configurations by focusing on the forging, this notion or idea of national identity and the processes of a state building that acquired, some sort of national qualities over time. So state and society approach actually would help divide or deconstruct state into different arenas, and these arenas you have to understand or to examine thoroughly, patterns of power and autonomy, how the state actually would dominate some sort of social arenas, while others it would face some sort of social challenges because of the existence of some autonomous social forces. And with regard to this reproduction of patterns of different patterns of dominance and legitimate authority, we focus on this processes that actually the processes actually compel large historical sweeps in order to highlight the processes of state building. And we focus mainly on the post-colonial state in Egypt under Nasser after free officers took over power, and the processes of state building in Latin America offered by courts. So starting with Nasser and the post-colonial state in Egypt, how post-colonial elites and free officers actually forging this national identity within the context of the the struggle, the national liberation struggle against the British authority, and how actually they re-engineered the state-society relations, or reshaped the relation with the society by establishing this state corporate structure. And we examined in some detail the relationship between the state and labor, agricultural cooperatives, and business associations. These were arenas where the state established, its dominant position, and its powerful position was very present. But in other areas, with regard to the relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood and like professional syndicates, the state actually faced some sort of fierce social resistance, or some social challenges. In Latin America, we focus on different. It's a double focus on the agricultural structure, servile or labor-free agricultural economy in Latin America, and elite politics, the relationship between caudillas or local elites and national elites, whether or not they manage to compromise in order to marginalize popular sectors, and to have like a deal or a compromise, and on this kind of, to have an agreement on the universal suffrage in order to exclude popular classes and to mute or any kind of distributional conflict. And in these cases where, like, this kind of free labor agrarian economy, and there was kind of compromise between national and local elites, state in Latin America, especially Uruguay and Chile, managed to establish this centralized political administration, that they acquired. These political administrative apparatuses acquired national character over time, and here by offering, showing the plausibility of some like institutional or this state in society account, would offer, some plausible causal explanation about that would help address, these theoretical questions posed for this topic. Ending with state and market. So the questions we were actually tackling, why it's kind of from political economic perspective, why some state in the global south or in the periphery actually managed to achieve a remarkable and high level of economic growth or economic development while others didn't. And what's the role of economic institutions, and if economic institutions would account for efficiency and guarantee efficiency. So why some countries perpetuated inefficient economic institutions by focusing on Acemoglu and Robinson article on political power and economic institutions, and then Peter Hall and his chapter on the power of economic ideas, with a special emphasis on Keynesian ideas of managerial state, and then Robert Bates about economic interest and policy preferences, and finally the why some countries adopt some different forms of welfare spending and social spending or social policies while others didn't. Kahli, actually, we focus mainly on Atul Kahli account on the role of the state. He highlighted, two main points here with regard to the role of the state, the patterns of state intervention in relation to state business, people, and labor, and the capacity of the state institutions in order to promote industrialization, export-oriented economy, and to upgrade, to push for institutional upgrading and technological promotion. And these kind of patterns of state intervention on the supply side in order to extract, some taxes and to mobilize resources between different sectors, and the demand side by institutionalizing relationship, disciplining or curbing, the constraining labor, and by not making any sort of side payment, and institutionalizing, relationship with the business in order to enable or to guarantee profit maximization by offering, tariffs, subsidies, and policies that would account for technology promotion. This led to the expansion of industrial bases and high and huge volume in exports and in exports in capital intensive or developmental states, especially South Korea, while the politicization of economic policies on the supply and demand sides in fragmented multi-class states in India and in some period time, like in some periods in Brazil. It, it didn't account for, it did account for why these countries didn't achieve the same level of economic development. And then neo-patrimonial state, by focusing mainly on Nigeria, that it didn't have this legal and rational bureaucratic apparatuses and the politicization of economic policy making. This led to the perpetuation of the extractive, state, and the continuity of the state with like immersing into the same law level or poor record of economic development, with highlighting the role of the economic institutions, and to what extent it would account in economic institutions are not responsible for economic efficiency, but actually establishing it's kind of a collective choice society has to make in order to establish these economic institutions to minimize transaction costs and to offer some information about the market conditions. It's not easy to offer these kind of legal institutions that would guarantee economic efficiency, because it would trigger distributional conflict or conflict over resources as well. So that's why shifting the analytical focus to the de facto or de jure power sources in society would help us understand why some economic efficiencies, why some institutions that are inherently inefficient actually perpetuated over time, or why some other countries manage to establish efficient economic institutions because of this synergy between economic power and political power. And then with the role of the economic ideas, we highlighted the managerial state and the active fiscal and monetary policies adopted by some European countries and the United States after the Great Depression in order to stimulate demands, or to stimulate or to encourage domestic investment by offering some measures of tax reduction or expansion of public work in order to manage, effective demand and to guarantee full employment. So again, Robert Bates, as I mentioned, he offered, this political economic account about how economic interests shaped policy preferences, and then how political institutions actually constrained choices made by some interest groups or economic groups in Kenya that eventually led to the famine or the dramatic outcome of food crisis there. Ending with this, the establishment of or the enactment of some social policies or welfare policies, we focus on different streams in the existing literature. Structural account would focus on industrialization logic and how expansion or industrial expansion motivated actors or motivated elites to undertake these to enact these, or to establish this kind of institutionalized welfare policies, and or they had like incentive to invest in education and vocational training in order to keep on going, with this industrial expansion and export-oriented or export promotion policies, or power resource by highlighting, the power or the organizational basis of labor movement, with the establishment of social democratic parties having representation in parliamentary or legislative branches. This actually enabled, state to push for more social spending. But again, this account depicted the struggle between workers and business, or employee and employers, as zero sum. So that's why cross-class alliances offered, filled in the gap by offering, this accounts that focus on class position and risk profile that would help people to push for, or to press or to pressure, the national government to enact different insurance schemes, or business-oriented explanations, and this kind of strategic bargaining between different classes and class compromise enabled business elites to settle on the second preference and to push for and to agree or to install these kind of to agree to these social spending and welfare policies. And these accounts actually left out the state, left the state out of the analysis. So that's why bringing, you know, the state back into the analysis by focusing on the role of the bureaucrats that would enable or block, you know, the advance or the implementation of these policies is central, you know, to understand different trajectories of social spending and welfare policies. And this policy person actually that offered this policy feedback and how policies produce politics by creating, you know, vested interest and distributional conflict and even mobilization of latent groups. This would actually offer possible building blocks for different theoretical streams that would account for different trajectories of social spending and welfare policies. So here you have, after having, you know, this like summary, if you're interested in like debates, theoretical debates, or like case-oriented studies, and the what kind of like recent and like novel, you know, theoretical debates in the field of comparative politics, you have here some leading journals that would offer some some good material, you know, for you in order to understand what's going on in the field. So you have comparative politics, comparative political studies, American political science review, and world politics, and annual review of political science. Not necessarily they have like different other focuses, but they have like some focus on comparative politics research as well. And here we ended the course. And I don't have any clue about, you know, the final. So it would be after the break. So I think I'm not sure if they will still, like, you know, abide by the same decision that it has to be multiple choice questions. So I have no idea. So we will pend, you know, everything. We will like pause until we have like some information about the form of the final exam. So meanwhile, so you will have to submit your term papers this Thursday. And next week, we will have like 4 sessions in order to finish the presentations. So we will not have a session, online session this Wednesday, but I'll make up for this next week, and we will have one extra lecture in order, hopefully, to finish with all the presentations, because actually the presentations account for together, you know, with the attendance, they account for 5% of the total grades. So now we have time to make the presentations. So I'll divide the presentations thematically. So after you upload your researches or your papers on Blackboard, so I'll organize the presentations and I'll post names on Moodle. So just stay tuned, you know, for these kind of organizations regarding your presentations next week. And your attendance is still required, because hopefully we can have, you can learn from, like, you acquire some presentation skills, and you can learn from the questions, you know, I pose, or the questions your colleagues actually or the comments, you know, they will make on your topics, on your papers, on your presentations. Okay? So you got all the information regarding, you know, the presentations. So I'll post the names on Moodle, and it's graded. The presentations are graded. Okay, so you will have to prepare like from 5 to 7 minute presentation. So what's the question, and how you apply the theory or the theoretical approach to the question, and this how it helped you answer or address the question you opted for. Okay, so that's all for today. And there is no session on Wednesday. So, but we will have like 4 sessions next week in order to finish our presentations. Okay, bye.